So we need to start developing that infrastructure through means of decentralized systems, things like DLive here, things like, more decentralized social media, getting away from the technocrats, getting away from government-controlled apparatuses, and becoming more self-aware. Welcome to another episode of AlphaCast. We're here today with a very special guest, David DuByne from the Adapt 2030 YouTube channel. You may know him from his daily talks about the grand solar minimum. And of course, we also have Dr. Berre Lando on with us today. It's going to be a really fun show today as we get into solutions for the oncoming cold we'll be facing with the grand solar minimum. There's all the scientific evidence and precedence for what we're dealing with is there. We don't want to get too bogged down with that today. Today we're going to focus more on solutions and what we can do for our own sovereignty and empowering ourselves to not only get through these times ahead, but also to really thrive in these times.
Yeah, a couple of platforms you might want to think about are Minds, M-I-N-D-S, crypto-based, and then Steemit as well. Because I'm taking the time to load all of my videos that I have transcribed and then the images inserted in there as PDFs up into Steemit, because I want to keep this on the blockchain unaltered. So when history reverts itself back and questions are asked about our past, at least that's there for the record. And anybody else can find it. You're talking about solutions and on a global audience. Well, I want them to be able to find my information that I put out unaltered, because you see the amount of censorship happening across the planet today. I mean, who knows what's going to be here next year, 2 years, 5 years from now? We're going to be looking at a different world. So what will still exist? I think that platforms that do have a decentralized working mechanism in there for information storage are still going to be here, and that information will be there unaltered. But will you get it unaltered on video platforms, websites, or some of these other social media platforms? I don't think so.
Yeah,
so for me, I'm actually taking the time to put it up there because I think it's that important that we need to get the unaltered data. So when they say, "Oh, we knew it was going to cool," no, you didn't. You lied to us, and I'm going to prove it when we go back and it's here on the blockchain. So you can't say that.
Exactly. That's what hit me over the head when I first got into blockchain, like 2016. It was actually around the time of the election with all the nonsense, with all this fake news and everything. And it was like, man, all of a sudden the universe sent me blockchain. And my wife will attest to this. I became addicted to researching it. I was up till 4 a.m. every night. I would have these like manic awakenings where I'd run in the room and like, oh my God, can you imagine what this is? Like what this can do? And of course, then we had the whole ICO boom and all the centralized control of it. But we've been on Steam platforms since 2016. Right around 2016, we started doing posts on Steemit. I kind of got over it a little bit as I got even more into nerding out on blockchain and seeing that there's even centralization there with the Steam platform. I'm not a huge EOS fan either with the way they're doing their consensus. That being said, you were right on. And what's cool about Steemit is once it's on, once the actual information is on there within like 3 or 4 days, it's on. You cannot take it down. It is on there. Now, as long as that it's got the right amount of dissemination or decentralization across enough nodes, it'll be there forever. And that's the power of blockchain, is the memory hole, the 1984 memory hole goes away. And that's something we're seeing more and more evident with Google, which is frightening that nowadays, we live in this polarity where thanks to Google and thanks to the internet, we have more mass awakening than we could ever imagine. But on the flip side of that, we also have the conduit of information being slowly pinched down to where we're only, we have the term Google, right? It's that verb, go Google it. Now what we're seeing more and more evident is because it's so centralized and controlled. And if you really nerd out on the history of Google, you'll see it was a deep state controlled, or whatever you want to call it, system set up with, they're always looking 50, 100 years out, knowing that this is where the world is going. And it's a complete 1984 memory hole system where you'll only get the information that they want you to see. So yes, blockchain is the future. Right now, they're doing everything they can to centralize and control it. However, there are, thank God, there's still enough freedom in the world where there are massive crypto nerds and blockchain developers creating the future of blockchain. And I'm happy to be on a team, and I'll announce it right now here. There's a new project coming out called Quartal, and it's based off the old, it's from an old, it was the original blockchain that actually invented the very first smart contract. This was before Ethereum. And they're coming out now with the decentralized router for a decentralized internet. And with that router, you get, it'll also be your miner. And essentially, it's an open source project. I'll put links to it in the description below. We're about to announce it on Bitcoin Talk. And these are the types of innovators that are out there. And these are people that are literally working for nothing. There's no big money behind it. There's no centralized control. Because they see that we're in a desperate, dire straits right now as far as this technology goes, because there are big companies doing everything in their power to take over the blockchain concept and do what they always do. Going back to like alternative energy, we know of hundreds of stories, Doc and I do, of really enterprising engineers who came up with whether you want to call it 0 point or whatever, these magnetic based generators that put out more than they take in, and these people are killed off, they're pushed to the side, they're threatened with their life. We know there's so many of these stories. Look at Royal Rife in the 30s with all the stuff he was doing and how he was destroyed. I mean, even look at Tesla. So what blockchain does is it allows the information. The one thing they've always been able to do is destroy the information. They raid the laboratory and take the servers, right? That's what they always do. That's what they did with Tesla's work, and also with the patents. The last thing you ever want to do is patent your technology. That's the ultimate honey trap. That's why patent system was developed, was to steal technology. We need to move forward in a world that doesn't have patents. It's all open source. Open source everything is the key to the future, all on the blockchain. And the blockchain needs to be fully decentralized, which means it needs to be completely distributed amongst nodes that are completely, I'm a big fan of proof of work without getting too nerdy on the crypto side. We need to be very vigilant with this technology because it is the future. So that's my spiel on that. But yeah, you're right on, man. And we'll find you on Steemit. We haven't been posting as much on Steemit of late, but I try to always put our video streams on DTube, and we put our podcast on DSound. And even though those have some issues, that it's better than the alternative, right? Which is the centralized servers on YouTube and on iTunes, etc. So we're slowly making that shift. And this is a good segue because I'm really interested to see what you think about this, David, on the reality of what's going to happen here, because this is something I struggle with. I mean, are we looking at a scenario here with this rapid change, which, as you say, it's as soon as 2021. I personally believe it started I feel like we're already in the thick of it from what we saw from the winters last year and what we're already seeing now with snowfall throughout the entire western states. It was starting in the summer already, and we're seeing glaciation because we're getting more snow on top of snow that hasn't melted, etc. This is the thing I struggle with. Are we going to be able to make that communal kind of evolvement with stuff like blockchain? Or are we literally going to it's going to be so dire that we're going to fall into more of a Mad Max type world? I mean, this is something that I struggle with as far as prepping and all that. What's your true outlook or perspective on that?
Well, I have a couple outlooks and perspectives. The first one would be if governments of the world were to tell us that the situation is strengthening with the decreases in solar output and will affect traditional agriculture. And Berre, I'm not talking about anything that you're doing, but traditional agriculture, as we think, you go out and plow the fields, you throw the fertilizer on them, you wait for the proper amount of rain and temperature, and then something grows. That is good. It's already out of kilter. You know, what we're talking about, if you look at the new FEMA reports coming out next year, 2020, they put year zero as 2019. Now, what that means is the U.S. government has already anticipated that it's almost like patient zero, the one that spreads it. Well, this is year zero, the first year that we're going to have some food crop losses due to the grand solar minimum. So when you start to see this word or this lexicon year zero scattered about the publications, they won't really reference what it is. I mean, they will somewhere, you know, with a 6 font point on page 912 at the bottom as a footnote. But that's what that means. Year zero is this year is the year. And I'll agree. It started back in 2015 when the intensification started. You could see it in different points on the map. And when you match that up with what happened during the Maunder minimum, places that kept good records in China on the Silk Road going back into 800 AD or so, you started to get a lot of pinpoints that were matching up with prior history. And then, you know, it's really gotten bad this last year. You know, the USDA with their reports on the corn is just to stabilize markets. I mean, really what we're seeing out in the fields is something completely different. DLT is doing their crop tour too, and they're saying that USDA is off by at least 25%. China lost 35% of its corn crops and just agriculture in general due to the spring armyworm and then also the fall armyworm, which is still running unchecked across the country, nibbling whatever didn't get nibbled. Almost the same variety of armyworm there, but they just didn't have the control measures in place. There's so much going on with the crop losses this year, and I don't know why they're not coming out and telling everybody. If they were to come out and just gingerly throw it out of the magazines and newspapers and on television, you're going to have to be more reliant on growing your own food. Why don't we start getting ready? Why don't you talk to your neighbor about growing food? If we could start to get into this kind of mind frame, and again, you know, Berre comes back to the manifestation. What if 8 billion people were thinking the same thing, like nothing bad's going to happen, we're going to manifest this, and the entire planet's going to work together, and we're going to have abundance beyond wild dreams, we're going to vibrate the plants differently, everything's going to grow differently, the soil, whatever we're thinking, 8 billion people thinking the same thing at the same time is definitely going to change the structure of reality on this planet. But the way it's going now, it doesn't seem that governments are really warning anybody, so...
Well, David, you've already answered this question. I mean, why don't we have Tesla technology? Why don't we have all these other innovations? Because this is a harsh thing to say, and people need to understand this. We have a global system run by a death cult. I mean, it's that simple.
Yes, with their symbology.
And they love it. This is great for them. Fear is their number one commodity. So they have no intention of seeing a vital, worldwide, prosperous thing. They need to be able to not only commoditize and profit off suffering, but they need it for their own spiritual, not growth, I guess, but the way that's what they feed off of. And we explain this more as far as the physics go. And then people, I think a lot of people have a gut reaction. Oh God, the conspiracy, David Icke, et cetera. But David Icke is right on. He was one of the first guys that woke me up back in the 90s, and he's been spot on. People scoff about the reptilian stuff or whatever, but it's time to accept the fact that this is what we're facing. And maybe this is nature's way of kind of cleaning up shop.
Okay, well, let me continue on that track then. I'm sorry, Berre, did you going to say something? Go right ahead.
No, I'd rather hear you.
Okay. The way it's going now, with the way it had occurred during the last 5 grand solar minimums, we're going to take you back to 79 AD here, going back a full 2,000 years. And we can even go to the 6th or 7th one back in, somewhere like 450 BC or something like that. That's fine. But what they always find is this economic contraction occurs. And that's because so many people are dying off. So many people can't grow enough food. There's not enough food for everybody. And then there's huge population migrations happening. So when you started to see the transition here into this cryptocurrency at this exact same time, what happened in all the run-ups during 2017, there was no way for anybody to exit out on their gains. So everything fell back. They were really, where do you put your money? It was very difficult to put it back into your entry point and, get it back out. But now there's DeFi, and you're taking a look at different ways. I don't know if you really believe if DAI is really, truly a stable coin, but it's something that could hold against the downturn. So when it spikes this next time, if you're looking at DeFi with digital finance, the way they break it down, that you can hold something on a decentralized platform or a decentralized stable coin itself to exit into that while things drop, there's going to be massive shifts in economy. And I mean massive shifts in economy. But this is where the greatest opportunity is. If you can see where the shifts are going to be, well, this whole entire industry over here in tourism and food and bev, whatever it might be, is going to contract almost to zero. And all that's going to reinflate over in the vertical agriculture, indoor vertical agriculture, retrofitting or refitting parking garages and shopping malls that have gone out of business to turn them into indoor food grow centers. I mean, there's an enormous amount of opportunity. R factor is going to have to be boosted in a lot of homes if people choose not to exit out of the areas they live in further north. And there's a huge range of opportunities for people out there if they see these impending changes. But it's always the same three things. And I would call it the fingerprint of the grand solar minimum. Population reduction, population migration, economic contraction or collapse, whatever word you like to use. Nothing goes to zero. Nothing goes to zero. But there's a huge contraction. And then along with that, I think it's the food first, the unavailability that drives the food prices up. Because when you look back I'll use the example of the 1640s to 1670. Now, during that time, and 7 different countries in Europe, the food prices would spike up 3 or 4x, and then they'd have a couple good harvests, and it would drop back down to almost the baseline. And the highest that it ever had increased up to was about 7x for the food price. And that was in Germany, Switzerland, and they're talking about rye prices during the day there. So think about if your food prices tripled, or if the food price is 7x higher, what are these people going to stop spending on first? And then if you can see where they're going to or reallocate those funds to survive or, get what they need for their families and themselves to stay alive, that's where the opportunity is being there in advance, knowing what they're going to need and help them along the way without gouging, of course. And this whole thing about, I hear some people going, oh, I can't wait for it. I can charge them X. That's not the way to think, but all these changes are stark. They're here unless we think differently. And this is the whole thing. Berre, I'm totally in agreement with you. It's going to manifest one way if we think one way. The media is getting us to think this way. I want us to start thinking in different ways to work together, develop new solutions, come up with new inventions that we can, start sharing and like this economy that we have now. It's just not going to last. We need to think of different ways to do it. But the mind is going to be the whole center point of everything moving forward. How you're going to adjust to it physiologically, psychologically, spiritually. I mean, if people can't get their medication because the just-in-time delivery system breaks down because it relies on easy credit, which is going to lock up like 2008 and 9 again, even more so. If there were going to be a bailout, it would be something in a different form, but it's not going to be as widespread. And I think the contraction is there to last, to usher us into the new crypto system. I don't think we're coming out of this contraction. I think it's meant to contract at a certain time right now, during all these vast changes, to force everybody into the new system. And that's just the way I see it. Because it's not just random happenstance that all these things are occurring right now when we're starting to get the food crop losses. We had the tech. Now, Mike, do we have the tech 10 years ago to get on blockchain and do what we're doing right now for the basic forms of it? Of course we did. Why did it take so long for us to get at least basic blockchain technology out there? Did Bitcoin really get invented 10 years ago? Could it have been 20 years ago? Why not 30 years ago? I mean, the tech was still there for the very basic type of constructs that we have for crypto. Why is everything rolling out right now? Right this second. There's too many things coalescing. I can't believe in all the coincidences happening at this time.
Yeah, I mean, we could go down many rabbit holes.
Yeah, you could go 1,000 directions with that, right? But that's, you wanted to go that direction with the thought, great. But Berre, I'm also, I'd like to go on the manifesting into a different type of reality as well.
Backing up to just solutions in regards to health. Obviously, we've seen that when it gets colder, people get sicker. And you made a good point of people not being able to get their medication because of the just-in-time system failing because of the credit crunch. That's something that I've been pushing a lot on Twitter, is that and it's perfect timing too, because we're seeing it more and more with the forced vaccinations and the failing medical system, the massive epidemics we're having with neurological disorders, and all this chronic illness, is that we need to start understanding that our health is based on our own sovereignty and our own ability to heal ourselves. Yes, in the future, I envision a world where we do have centers for trauma. So obviously we need a hip replacement. We have an emergency situation where someone's bleeding out. Like that's where Western medicine is massively skilled and important. We know it, it's true. So getting more self-sufficient with your health so you're not on medication is probably the number one most important thing. And there's herbalism, there's going back into the spirituality of it and all that. It's something that we talk about regularly every week on this channel. So first and foremost, I think in order to thrive, you need to be healthy. So you got to get your health in line right now. You got to figure out what's going on with you if you're having health issues, and getting self-sufficient and getting your sovereignty back to control that. So you're not going to doctor's visits every week. That needs to end first and foremost. Second, you need to figure out where your food's coming from, and you need to start growing your own food. The big ag model is going to be a failing system. As far as, as we head out of the grand solar minimum, then yeah, we should hopefully have these new models set up. But first and foremost, I just don't see it happening where we're going to have this whole new system set up. So on the macro level, I do see great decline and I see great chaos. But if we can get into a communal aspect where you get into a community where you can barter with your neighbors and you can each figure out what to grow, because we know, and you mentioned, Dave, like if, as far as economic aspects of, converting malls into growing food and converting wasteland and cities, it's not going to be able to cover all the agricultural land we're going to lose. There's
not even close. Not even 10%.
Exactly.
Not even 10%.
So self-sufficient, you have to take care of yourself first and foremost, and your family, and then your community. And so living in the center of Los Angeles, do you have it? I don't know. Is that the smartest thing to be? No. So you need to start thinking of these things. And it's, once again, this is not fear-based. This is just common sense stuff. And just for your overall health, is it healthy to be living in amidst 5G and all the air pollution in a place like Los Angeles, Mexico City, New York City? The cities right now are failure points, are the failure nodes of the current just-in-time system, as well as the overall macroeconomic system where we have infinite growth. The infinite growth model is failing. So those are some very obvious things, right, that people need to start thinking about right now. Berre, what do you got to say as far as one thing I'd love to get into is soil science, moving into growing your own food. And one thing that I really want to do too, first and foremost, is get an underground greenhouse going, stuff like that, so that we can be empowered to start producing more food that's super nutrient dense. Any words of advice on that, Berre?
Yeah, boy, I've had so many thoughts come up, but I'm just enjoying listening to you guys. I don't know where to start. Here on the farm, we're going into geothermal greenhouses, that are mostly submerged so that we can keep ourselves growing year round. A lot of those measures. I can provide also a lot of anecdotal evidence of everything David understands even better about what's going on the planet with the solar minimum. I'd also like to hear more from David, what he's hearing just from farmers on the ground. We talk in our community here, and what's unique about this community, we're not just farmers. It's not like going down Highway 5 in the Central Valley and seeing all the big agricultural farmers. Yeah, they're all out there growing things and on their tractors, but they aren't surrounded by wilderness. When you're surrounded by wilderness, you can also go into the natural habitats and see that while the huckleberries aren't thriving, why aren't they producing berries this year? David, do you have any feedback as far as how much, the things we notice like that are maybe related to solar minimum versus aerosol in the atmosphere?
Yeah, that new geoengineering program at Harvard, so much touting that they want to start. I think that's just a bad idea because, if they have the particulates up there and we get a VEI 6 or 7 eruption, I mean, how long does that take to come out? I mean, if you already have all those particulates up there and then we have a whole bunch of volcanic ash and sulfur dioxide up there, you're going to get just an exponential runaway effect of cooling. But I keep getting a lot of reports of blueberries seem to be failing this year. flowers not blooming, fruit that does emerge, it'll emerge halfway, or it just won't fully fruit. The fruit will be 1/4 the size and it'll never ripen. It's more like a seed with a coating on it, basically. A lot of the frost freeze damage types of things where blooms had emerged, everything died off, it tried to reemerge again with another second flowering. Nature does its thing, but the second flowering was killed off. And the dryness with the hay, you're getting a lot of farmers who are saying they have no hay. They're trying to, sell their herds because they just don't have enough hay, because it's something like $35 a bale, and it's just ridiculous. And you start to see all these losses mounting up, from the chilies to the lettuces to the cattle to the blueberry to the fruit industry. And everywhere you look across the planet, it's happening literally everywhere. And now, you talked about that, Berre. That was my report that I had today of a guy I'm going to call and talk with. He trades grains out of Saskatchewan and Alberta up there. And he was telling me that, what you're seeing on the news where they're saying it's coming in or might come in to equal or last year, he's laughing, saying minimum 30% loss, 25% loss compared to last year's crop. So he's really wondering, with a straight face, how are these news organizations out there being able to put these news releases out when they know for a full fact that it's nowhere close? And I'm just under the volition is to stabilize markets and, try to string this down as long as they can on the road here. But, Berre, I might add in one last thing here. Myself right now, I'm growing Moringa oleifera on my balcony. Those are really incredible, easy plants to grow if you have the right habitat for them. They like warmer weather, and that food itself is a superfood. We're trying to do some small raceway ponds here for algae as well. And Gainura, which is a Chinese longevity herb, and it's grown in India, nutrient dense. It's called, Asian spinach, if you will. Gainura is another one. And then the goji berries that grow out of a plant that goes straight up, pretty easy, as long as they have sunlight and enough water, goji. And these are, again, longevity herbs with a lot of micronutrients in them. And that's kind of what I have for my own micronutrient pantry out in my fresh garden, to try to go out there. The leaves are so easy to strip off moringa, dry them out, turn them into a powder, eat it fresh, whatever. But there's so many opportunities. And that's one thing that they found too. Plagues would sweep through during the grand solar minimums because people's immune systems were so depleted. So whatever we can do to get these, micronutrient dense foods back in our bodies to keep our immune systems up. So if it was sweeping through, you would be missed because your immune system would just be naturally strong enough to fight off what would have taken everybody else down.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, a lot of those things you mentioned, we're on those ourselves. And moringa is a great one. Up here, unfortunately, it wouldn't weather through our winters. So we're looking at more tunnel greenhouses, to, keep them thriving during the winter. Another thing, we're noticing that fruiting and berries aren't happening, the way they should be, even in the wildlands. But one thing that does seem to survive better are more the low bushy things and just the herbs in the forest. So wildcrafting could be a really good skill to pick up in the future too, because I think some of those will thrive when other plant species don't, because we already see evidence of that. For instance, things like nettles, there's things, that we just consider weeds and useless. We clean them out of our yards all the time to do landscaping. And meanwhile, something like nettles is one of the more nutrient-rich things you could possibly have. It's a medicine, it's a food. And so I think it would be valuable for a lot of people to really understand what's growing just naturally, that they don't even have to produce or spend any time or money doing themselves. In case of a long-term solar minimum, we'll see what happens in the wildlands too. Mike, you said an interesting thing about, people get sicker when it's cold. That's true when you're looking at the general herds. On the other hand, when people start changing their minds about things, people like Wim Hof, for instance, comes along and says, well, cold is our friend, it'll actually make you healthier. And some of us have actually experimented with his techniques and show that when we regularly subject ourselves to cold, we don't fear it, and we combine it with different breathing techniques, things that they used to in other cultures call pranayama and so forth, that when you combine the two, your immune system gets stronger, you don't get sick. And, so again, it's about changing our minds about a lot of things. We're in a predicament now because there's so many fundamental things that people are still in denial of. Back in the 80s and early 90s, we were part of a group where we were getting feature speakers domestically here, people like David Icke, you know, before he was a superstar, and guys like G. Edward Griffin that wrote the definitive book on who's really behind the Federal Reserve. We were putting together seminars, getting people in, and then and it was really catching on, but they shut it all down. Now, this was pre-internet, so we had to do it the longhand way. And so finally what we did, you know, we started going overseas and doing them there. Bust us. But the point I'm trying to make is back then we knew that if people couldn't wrap their minds around the fact that our government, our medical, you know, our political institutions, our financial institutions are all corrupt and not working for our best interest, then it's really hard to go to the next step of entertaining the idea of we're all center of our own universe and collectively we can create anything we want. But a few years ago, a lot of us in these movements, we got together and we said, okay, we've done the best we can do with education, and the people that understand that things just aren't right are there, and there's not enough time to educate people anymore. Now we do our little modest podcast here and talk about some of these things still, but what we're more involved with now, like you, David, is solutions on, okay, where do we go from here? Because we have to start doing things, and we don't believe there's time really to educate people that still don't know the basics, because it's a sequential process. And you can even think of it as a spiritual process, because if you, again, can't just see what's in front of your eyes, then how the hell are you going to go in and really going into the deeper levels of yourself and see things firsthand where you don't have to get external evidence anymore? So I think, yeah, that's where we're all at, Michael and myself. That's what we're promoting, and that's why we're having people like you on here. So any comments on where you think we're at as far as where our educational efforts should be placed at this point?